So I was impressed that Jeremy talked a lot about trying to resolve some of the theoretical issues, the multiple theories you're trying to pull into the work and the various conceptual and relational components of those theories. And Tony, you said you kind of based your program on a framework. I thought I heard you say you intentionally did not worry about being fully adherent to theoretical approaches. I think one of your last slides even said, the need to balance the research and theory with the pragmatics of the community. I'm wondering if you two could talk about that a little bit. It's kind of an interesting thing.
Well, I'm certainly not atheoretical, and there was a strong theory that supported the development of the intervention. I'm not an implementation scientist, but certainly interested in how is it that we move these innovations forward. And as I was looking for theories, or something to help me hang my hat and organize it, I couldn't find anything that really spoke to what it was that I was trying to do. I think the framework that I shared with you is one that at least helped me understand the different components and where it was that I needed to focus as I was, again, developing a few grants. So I'm not sure that there's not enough theory. I'm not sure how far we need. I think we can build theory as we move forward. But at least for me, in what I was doing at the time, the framework was sufficient for me to do that.
The only thing I would add is I guess I'm articulating the need for probably better use of theory, partly as a way of explicating what people's logic models are and hopefully improve the sort of generalizability of the findings we've got. And I think I have two comments. One is my guess is a lot of the components that Antonio's intervention had, if you went back, you would find sort of underlying empirical support for the work that was there or sort of theoretical perspectives. The fact that you weren't necessarily explicitly using that doesn't mean that actually there wasn't probably quite a lot of substantive sort of knowledge behind that. So I think we need to, I guess I've been pushing theory from the basis of a field where I think there's been really very poor underuse of theory. But we also have to be reasonably pragmatic about this as well. And I'd really worry if implementation science became about pursuing theory as opposed to trying to solve problems. And there are times when you want to solve problems that there's an awful lot of different types of knowledge that will actually contribute to that often are reasonably supported by theory.
Sorry, Maria, one second. So I have I'll try to articulate this question clearly because I'd actually like all three of you perhaps ultimately to comment on it. And it really drives to the context of knowledge synthesis based around the standard of the RCT. And really is the RCT, which you in fact did use, Tony, to sort of drive then the model for the implemented intervention. Is that a standard that we really need to hang our entire hat on? And I'll give you some personal context. In intensive care studies, when we have 6,000 possible enrolled subjects, we end up studying 200 of them. And when I see the results from that study, I always say it has no bearing on my general population. So, and I would ask Professor Yates, are there marketing, I guess I would say, tricks that people use beyond just the highest level of evidence to drive decision makings that we might be able to start to sway people's decision making capacity, beyond just the gold standard RCT evidence from the business models? So it's kind of a complex question, but would like to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Well, that was a very Does it work? That was a very provocative question. But in terms of what's persuasive, I mean, there's been a lot of research within decision psychology for years pointing out that statistics are not terribly persuasive, and there are ways that you can frame statistics so that they're more persuasive. So for instance, in an area that would be more familiar to this group, is using relative risk rather than absolute risk. I mean, so that's has to do with the class of problems we studied years ago. But what's really effective is stories, cases, and all you got to do is at night just watch a little bit of TV, and probably a third of the commercials you see are for pharmaceuticals, and they don't talk a whole lot about statistics. They do talk a lot about, or they imply stories. And so some of us can step back and say, man, that sure is unethical, but it works. And so you want to do it in an effective way that's true to what actual effects are.
I think part of the, and I think building on that is what's persuasive to who? You know, so if you're going into your scientific community, if you're going to an NIH study section, you do the RCT. And as much as the field will say we want to be open to other methods of discovery, other evidence, it's the RCT. It's the RCT. And when you go to communities, that's not what's going to persuade them to use that. What they say is, we have that knowledge. We've been dealing with the situation. We know what works. Why won't you adopt what we have? So that's part of the tension. That's part of the tension that's there. So we had a sidebar conversation earlier about the need to develop methods, I think, to really build that evidence base, I think, is where we need to go to think about how is it then that we can, have a reasonable thread that what we're doing in these RCTs really is going to work in the settings that you describe.
So I'll respond more from a kind of methodological perspective, and really talk at two different levels. One of the things is that I get concerned when we talk about RCTs, that people equate RCTs with phase 2 tightly controlled studies, drug-type studies. In my view, there are many different types of randomized controlled trial, and the only thing that's common to them is they use some form of random assignment between intervention and control. And then there are a range of decisions that we make, which either put them into a much more closer efficacy, where you're really testing the mechanism and you're worried about, or then you have greater concerns about generalizability, or you can build effectiveness studies where you really are trying to mimic the patient populations, the context where this would be enacted in real time. So I think RCTs are one tool, but we have to see that there's a kind of there's a breadth of RCTs, and really try and counter that idea that it's a typical drug trial. The second thing I'd say is when we think about systematic reviews, they pool multiple RCTs, and those RCTs don't have identical patient populations. They're not all in the same settings. So I think if we're thinking about what is the knowledge, however we then try and persuade people, but how do we know we're doing more good than harm? That if we start to look at systematic reviews of the evidence, that by itself starts to suggest that, or starts to give us a better idea across a range of different patient groups, across a range of different contexts. And you can explore in systematic reviews whether your findings are consistent or not consistent, and what are the factors that drive those. So I believe randomized controlled trials are a really useful tool for trying to explore causal description. And it hugely reassures me that you've kind of done that. Then I think we need to sort of build from single RCTs into many RCTs and other types of design to look at the sort of what the implications of this are for policy and practice.